I don't know what to say. We're going to be addressing injustice and inequity. This segment is titled, I Don't Know What to Say. I'm Joanne Smichael. Welcome to my YouTube channel. We're going to be dealing with some sensitive issues today. Issues of injustice, inequality, bigotry, and racism. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you will get tools that you can actually use to build bridges. There's so much angst, anxiety, and tension that it's almost palpable. The resurgence of blatant, seemingly intractable racism and bigotry, the surfacing of inequity and injustice, it is all exhausting, simply exhausting for peace-loving people. And I keep hearing the phrase, I don't know what to say. I hear it from people experiencing inequity and injustice. I hear it from people who want to be allies and supporters of peace. I even hear it from people who are in complete denial of there being any issues of race, gender, or other biases. We're going to spend a little time figuring out a few ways to begin having tough conversations. I want to start with the question, what do I say? I think we begin by saying just that. I don't know what to say. It's a humble, honest way to begin conversation. It acknowledges the fact that you really don't know what the other person is experiencing. It acknowledges the difficulty of the conversation and of future conversations. Once we've addressed the fact that we don't know what to say, we simply invite the other person to share whatever aspects of their story they're comfortable discussing. I want to give you a specific example. When George Floyd was murdered, a friend called and said that she didn't know what to say. She asked me, Joanne, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? That was an open door for us to have cross-racial discussion about what I was thinking and feeling. I had the opportunity to tell her that George Floyd wasn't the first. I told her it reminded me of the killing of Emmett Till. I told her about the many, 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 many Black people killed in the last 20 or 30 years, and that no one had been held accountable. I don't know that she was prepared to hear everything I thought and felt. In fact, I suspect that it was overwhelming. However, she asked the question and she opened the door for honest dialogue. Notice that I said it was dialogue. As we continued to talk, she shared her discomfort discussing race. She told me that she felt awkward and uninformed about the experiences of many people of color in this country. She told me what it was like to grow up in an environment with no ethnic or racial diversity. She explained that she had spent her formative years completely oblivious to people who were not just like her. That mutual exchange of experiences was important. It was uncharted territory in our relationship. It's opened the door for both of us to come to know each other much more deeply. We're developing the ability to get beyond the surface of polite interchange to more substantive discussions of what is real in our society. I'm not saying that these conversations are easy for anyone. I am saying that they're necessary. In spite of the discomfort, there are two things that lay the foundation for effective dialogue: listening and learning. Listen. That means turning off the voices in your head, not assuming that you know what the other person is going to say, and becoming curious about what the person actually has to say. There are three types of listening. The first is active. All that means is that your auditory function works, that you can physically hear. You may not be paying attention, but you can hear. Attentive listening means that you can hear and are listening well enough to have some understanding. Now, you may be forming a rebuttal in your head. You may be waging war or waging a silent argument with the other person, but you are attentive enough to what's being said, if no other reason than to be ready with your position and your argument. Courageous listening is what we seek when we want to create pathways for justice and equity. When we want to deepen our relationships, this is when our auditory function works. We're paying attention to the message, but not to debate it or argue with it. Instead, we're listening to develop understanding. Our hearts are open to actually understanding another perspective. We don't have to agree to develop understanding. When we're courageous listeners, we're willing to risk being persuaded. We're able to honor the message, though we don't agree with it. Equally as important, we're able to honor the sender because they are another human being and they're worthy of our respect. Now that we've laid the foundation with courageous listening, let's move to learning. This means that we're taking in new information and using it as a learning opportunity. While we're living in the same world, we're having vastly different experiences based on race, gender, age, ability, education, politics, national origin, or any number of other defining factors. Are you open to learning about other people's experiences? I think of the learning piece as an opportunity for mutual growth. Notice that I said mutual growth. It's important for others to learn about our lives and for us to learn about theirs. I want to talk a little bit more about creating quality dialogue. My friend Alex Porter says that when we begin with these difficult conversations about race and justice and equity, it's like learning a new language. I speak a little Spanish, little being the operative word. I tend to get tense, nervous, and really uncertain when I'm going to try to speak, especially to a native speaker. I usually feel like I might mess up the conversation, look like an idiot, and sound like a fool. And this is probably what potential allies feel like when they want to address issues of injustice, of inequality, of racism, of sexism, of homophobia, and don't quite know how. I know that I'm more apt to practice my linguistic abilities, feeble as they are, when I know the other person really does want to have a conversation with me. When they're patient, that means that they'll forgive me when I use the wrong tense. That means that they will gently correct me when I use the wrong word or phrase. That means that they will just wait when it's taking me time to listen in Spanish, translate in my head, and then respond. Actually, to listen in English, translate in my head, and respond in Spanish. That's how we move the needle towards uniting for justice and equality. That's when we are able to learn a new language, to forgive each other for mispronunciations, for using the wrong tenses or seeming foolish, when all we want to do is to communicate with and understand each other. We have to allow each other to say, I just don't know what to say, or I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. Treating these conversations like a new language and new learning, and in some ways these conversations are a new language and new learning, that requires some fearlessness, it requires some forgiveness, and some personal fortitude. Often, when we don't know what to say, we redirect the conversation into our own comfort zone. I notice that people sometimes hijack the conversation to stay where they're most comfortable. They want to keep the conversation focused solely on their perceptions and their experiences. Let me give you a clear example. A colleague and I got into a discussion about what I consider rampant racism in our country. The person said she agreed, but she felt that racism was just everywhere with everyone. She then took the next 3 or 4 minutes to tell me all about every time she was ever pulled over by the police and how well she was treated. She told me about the day a young black man gave her the finger. She told me about the fact that her church is multiracial and she lives in a multiracial community. She went on to say that she really understood because she, even as a white woman, had been treated unkindly and knew all about racism. That was a conversation hijack. It minimized my experiences and made me less likely to surface the subject with her again. So don't hijack the conversation. Learn to practice courageous listening. I'd like to wrap up. I don't know what to say. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I don't want to offend anyone. These are common feelings that keep us from building bridges. Get past the discomfort and the fear by becoming a courageous listener. That means being willing to risk being persuaded. It means honoring the message and the speaker, whether you agree and can relate or not. When someone's sharing their experiences, they're offering you a gift, a very precious gift. In all of these difficult conversations, there are opportunities for mutual learning, mutual growth, and the possibility of building mutual respect for people whom we deem the other. None of that can happen if we insist on hijacking the conversation to stay in our comfort zones, to prove our points, or to just redirect a sensitive subject. Be willing to go deeper, to be a courageous listener. None of the issues of injustice, inequity, racism, bigotry, none of those are easy issues for peace-loving people to grapple with. And yet, we must. We cannot turn a blind eye or live in a delusional state. We have to take action to unite. My hope is that you've gained a few tools to have difficult conversations, to listen, to learn, and to grow.